One LinkedIn message. That's the whole move. His girlfriend of 4 years ended things via text, opening with BTW, like she was reminding him to pick up milk. And all this guy did was reply, "Congrats, spend about 20 minutes on Google, and send one message to the person who deserved to know the truth." What came after wasn't a revenge plan. It was just consequences finding the right people at the right time. 2 terminations, divorce papers, a civil lawsuit, a GoFundMe that raised $127 before the platform shut it down for violating terms of service, and criminal charges for embezzlement. All from one screenshot. Let's get into it. She texted, "By the way, I'm moving on with my boss." I said, "Congrats." When his wife arrived at the office with security and divorce papers, their fresh romance became unemployment. I want to be honest up front. Nothing I did was planned. There was no strategy session, no late-night revenge mapping, no moment where I sat down and thought, okay, here's the playbook. I told one person some information she had every right to know, and then I watched what truth can do when it lands in the right inbox. I'm just the guy who happened to be holding the screenshots. Amber and I met through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue. She laughed at something I said. I kept going until she laughed again. That was basically the whole courtship. We dated for about a year before I told her I was serious about her, and we moved in together after around 18 months. The apartment was mine from the beginning. Lease in my name, deposit in my name, furniture I assembled piece by piece over several weekends when I first moved to the city. It was a good apartment, good neighborhood, manageable commute, one of those places you think you might keep for a while. She moved her things in gradually, the way people do. And at some point it stopped feeling like just mine, without either of us marking the moment. I work as a project coordinator at an operations consulting firm. Track timelines, manage deliverables, show up when I say I will. Amber always called it boring, said I was too structured, too predictable, not spontaneous enough for her. I used to take it as a lighthearted jab. Looking back, I think she'd started meaning it more seriously than I ever caught on to. The relationship had been slowly losing altitude for a while before the text. Nothing dramatic. We weren't throwing things or going silent for days at a time. More like a thermostat that keeps getting turned down in small increments. She was harder to reach, less interested in planning anything together. More focused on work, she said, and more specifically, on Colin. Over the past year or so, she'd been bringing him up constantly. Colin thinks the campaign should go in a different direction. Colin and I stayed late working through the proposal. Colin says I should push for a title change. He thinks I'm being underused. I heard the name so often it stopped registering as something to pay attention to. He was her boss. Of course she talked about him. I wasn't going to manufacture a problem that might not exist. Small things had been off for a while, though, and I mean genuinely small. She stopped asking about my day in a way that expected an actual answer. She'd be on her phone during dinners we used to spend talking about whatever. We had a running thing where we'd both send each other dumb articles during the workday, kind of a light touch to stay in each other's orbit. That stopped. I noticed but didn't say anything. You don't want to be the guy who says, "You haven't texted me anything funny in 2 weeks, are we okay?" That sounds like a problem that isn't actually a problem. Looking back, I can place when the drift picked up speed. Around 8 or 9 months before the text, she started working later. Not 1 or 2 late nights, a new baseline. She'd come home quieter, more distracted, kind of elsewhere even when she was sitting next to me. I chalked it up to a big campaign cycle. She mentioned Colin more during that stretch too. Not in a way that raised any particular flag, just in the way you reference someone you spend a lot of time with. The name was woven into her days, the same way a coworker's name gets woven in. I didn't read it as anything else. Except the problem definitely existed. I just didn't know it yet. Colin Hartley, 38, married with 2 kids, and the kind of guy who had built an entire public persona around being a devoted family man. His LinkedIn was a steady scroll of posts about protecting what matters most, and work-life balance starts at home, with photos of his kids in Little League uniforms and captions about leading with your values. Some of his posts were getting upward of 400 likes. Strangers in the comments were typing, "This is what real leadership looks like," and "Your family is lucky to have you." He'd carefully constructed a whole image. He and his wife Dana came to our apartment for dinner about 6 months before everything went sideways. I made pasta from scratch. It's a recipe that's been in my family for a while. The kind of thing that takes most of an afternoon if you're doing it right. Colin said it was the best he'd ever had. He pulled out his phone and actually wrote down the ingredients I described. He was good at that kind of thing, making you feel like you had his full attention, like you were the most interesting thing happening in his day. Dana was sharp and warm in a different, quieter way. She asked real questions about my work and listened to the full answers, not just waiting for her turn to talk. They seemed genuinely solid together. We spent 3 hours at that table, talked about taking a couples trip that summer, all 4 of us, maybe somewhere with a beach. I left the evening thinking they were worth staying in contact with. That was 6 months before the text. The text came in at 11:14 on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk, halfway through a stack of invoices, and my phone buzzed. By the way, I've been seeing Colin from work. We're in love. I'm moving on with him. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'll get my stuff this weekend. BTW. She started it with BTW. 4 years. 1 apartment, 2 lease renewals. Every holiday and road trip and rough week where I'd shown up, and every quiet Sunday where nothing much happened, but we were still in the same place together. And she opened the goodbye with BTW. Like a postscript, like something she'd almost forgotten to mention. I read it twice, then I typed, "Congrats," sent it, went back to work. The dots appeared almost immediately, kept disappearing and coming back. Then, "That's it? Congrats?" What else is there to say? You told me you're in love with someone else. Good luck. I expected you to fight for us. You just told me via text that you're moving on. What exactly am I fighting for? This is why we don't work. You're emotionally unavailable. I screenshot the whole exchange. Seemed like a thing worth keeping. Then I finished my invoices, ate my sad desk salad, turkey and mustard, nothing special about it, answered 3 emails about a supplier billing issue, and got through the rest of a completely normal Thursday. Mostly. That evening, I started thinking about Colin. Amber had always described him like he was running the whole operation, built Hartley's strategy group from nothing, made all the important calls, the vision guy. I'd never had any reason to look him up before. So I looked him up. His LinkedIn was exactly what you'd expect. Polished headshot, impressive sounding titles, posts about leading with integrity and doing right by your people. A recent one about how his family was his greatest achievement had over 400 likes and comments full of affirmations. The posts were specific enough to feel real. His daughter's name on a birthday caption, his son in a game jersey, photos that looked candid rather than staged. He'd referenced Dana by name in a couple of them. Things like, "Dana and I finally carved out 2 hours for date night. Those wins matter." Under that one, over 100 people had liked it. The profile of a guy who had his whole life sorted and wanted you to know it. I scrolled back further than I'd planned before I caught myself and stopped. Then I went to the company page. Hartley Strategy Group. Founded by Dana Hartley, 8 years ago. The About section described the firm as built on ethical business practices and transparent communication. She'd grown it from 4 people to just over 50. She had an MBA from Wharton. She'd been quoted in industry trade publications. The founding story, the client philosophy, the direction of the firm, all of it came back to Dana. Every bit of it. Colin had joined as Director of Client Services 5 years ago. Not a co-founder, not a partner, not an owner of any kind. He was an employee, his wife's employee at his wife's company, in an office his wife's business had paid for. I went back through some of Amber's older texts, not looking for anything specific, just inventorying things I'd already read. She'd told me more than once that Colin basically runs the place, that he was the real creative force behind the firm. Once, when I'd asked how the company was doing, she'd said, "Colin handles all of that. He's really sharp about the business side." He didn't handle any of that. That was all Dana. Every story Amber had told me, the visionary, the builder, the man who had created something from nothing, those were actually descriptions of the woman he was cheating on. I sat with that for a few minutes. Then I found Dana's LinkedIn and sent her a message. "Hi, Mrs. Hartley. I think there's something you should know about your husband and my girlfriend. I have screenshots if you need them for any proceedings." She responded in 53 minutes. "Please send everything to this email. Thank you. I forwarded the screenshots, Amber's text, our full exchange, a couple of other things I'd held on to, and went to bed. I slept fine, if you're wondering. I don't know if that makes me cold or just practical, but it's the truth. Hold on, me jumping in here, not the OP, because I need a second to appreciate this. Captain Family Values, posting about protecting what matters most, was running his whole situation on company email and company time. At his wife's company. And he just got forwarded to her. What's next? Submitting hotel rooms as a business expense for quarterly review. That confidence level is a medical event. For audio listeners, that's me. Dana Hartley built a 50-person firm from nothing and has a Wharton MBA. She's about to handle this exactly the way you'd expect someone like that to. Efficiently. The weekend between Thursday and Monday was quiet. I didn't hear anything from Amber. She'd said she'd come for her things, but she never showed. I'd half expected that. I boxed up what I knew was clearly hers. A couple of jackets from the coat closet, some skincare stuff from the bathroom, a few books. Left it by the front door. Saturday, she didn't come. Sunday, she didn't come. Around 7 that evening, I took the boxes apart and put her things back where they were. She could deal with it when she was ready. I went to the gym Saturday morning like I always do. Came back, made eggs, finished a documentary I'd been putting off for 2 weeks about deep sea something or other. I barely remember it. Called my mom that evening, talked for about 40 minutes. Didn't mention any of it. She was updating me on a neighbor dispute that had apparently escalated to a certified letter, which was genuinely the most interesting thing happening in my life at that point. I ate leftovers, went to bed at a normal time. I don't know exactly what I expected to feel. Mostly I just felt like I was waiting. The LinkedIn message was sent. The screenshots were wherever they were going. There was nothing left for me to do except show up Monday and see what a normal week looked like. Monday, Dana walked into Hartley Strategy Group with her personal attorney and 2 security guards. Nate, a co-worker who still works there, a solid guy who owes me roughly nothing and sends these updates out of pure goodwill, was texting me a play-by-play from inside the building. He said the entire floor went quiet when they came through the front door. People at their desks just stopped. Colin was in his corner office, the one Dana's company had given him, having his morning coffee with Amber, who was supposed to be 3 hours into a client campaign. Dana came in, didn't raise her voice, set a folder on the desk in front of Colin, and let it sit there. You're terminated effective immediately for violation of company policy regarding relationships between supervisors and their direct reports. Security will escort you out. Your personal items will be mailed to your parents' address. Colin opened with confusion. Honey, what are you talking about? He actually tried that. She tapped the folder. Divorce papers on top. Underneath, a civil lawsuit filed against Amber for alienation of affection. She looked at Amber next. You're also terminated. Same policy violation. You used company email to coordinate this relationship. I have the full record. Company property, company records, my decision. Amber said she couldn't be fired for dating someone. Dana told her she wasn't being fired for dating someone. She was being fired for dating her direct supervisor, lying about it to HR on multiple occasions, and using company resources to conduct the relationship during work hours. Those were documented policy violations. Colin switched to emotional, started to say he could explain. Dana looked at Amber, still calm. He told me last month he wanted to try for another baby. Was that before or after he was declaring his love to you? Nate said the room held very still for a few seconds after that. Security escorted them out separately. Colin went for his laptop on the way to the door. The guard stopped him. He said he had personal files on it that he needed. The guard said it was company property, and if he had concerns, he was welcome to raise them with his attorney. Colin pointed out the files were important. The guard agreed they probably were. Still didn't hand over the laptop. The whole operation took under 15 minutes. Nate told me afterward that the office barely functioned for the rest of the day. People hovering, talking quietly. Dana went straight into a management team meeting, like none of it had happened. Nate said the afternoon had that specific kind of quiet that settles over a workplace when something goes wrong in leadership. Not silence exactly, more like everyone doing their own internal accounting of what had changed and what it meant for them. A few people left early with vague excuses. Some of the senior staff who'd been quietly passed over for things Colin controlled were notably calm. One of them apparently spent most of the afternoon finishing a project he'd been sitting on for months. Just got on with it. Dana sent a company-wide email at 4 p.m. 3 sentences. It confirmed 2 leadership changes, said the management team had been briefed, and wished everyone a productive rest of the week. No explanation, no drama. She didn't need to say anything else. Everyone already knew. Amber called me crying that afternoon. "How could you do this to me?" I asked her to be specific about what I had done. "I lost my job. Colin lost his job. His wife is suing me for $200,000. You ruined everything. You sent me a text saying you were in love with your married boss. After that, the relationship was over. I had every right to share information that affected someone other than just me. She's insane. This is completely vindictive. She built a 50-person firm in 8 years. She's protecting what she built. The firm is hers, the house is hers, the savings are mostly hers. Colin was a director of client services with access to things he didn't own." A pause. "You knew that?" "Googled it. All public." She hung up. Colin left a voicemail around 20 minutes later. Called me vindictive. Said I'd destroyed 2 careers over jealousy. Said he hoped I was proud of myself. I texted back, "Doing great, actually. Thanks for checking in." Wait. Audio, folks? Me again. I need to make sure I've got this timeline right. Colin was sitting in the corner office his wife's company built, having his wife's company's coffee with his girlfriend, when his wife walked in with a lawyer and divorce papers. And Dana didn't raise her voice. She showed up with the folder already put together, the legal action already filed, and handled the whole thing in 15 minutes before anyone's second cup went cold. Colin wanted a blow-up. He got an exit interview. His title, his office, his entire arrangement ended with a folder sliding across a desk. That's not karma. That's administration. About a week after the firing, Amber showed up at my door with her mom, Linda. She texted first, wanted to talk like adults. I let them in. Partly leftover courtesy. Partly I genuinely couldn't predict what approach they were going to use, and I was curious. Linda opened before she'd even fully sat down. "You need to contact Dana and tell her you lied." I didn't lie. I forwarded screenshots of Amber's own words. "You took them out of context." The context was, "By the way, I've been seeing Colin from work. We're in love. What am I missing?" Amber was doing the crying thing, not a full breakdown, more like a controlled performance of distress. Strategic moisture, wet eyes, occasional sniff, glancing over at me every 30 seconds to see if any of it was landing. She told me again about the $200,000 lawsuit. I told her alienation of affection was a recognized legal concept in this state. Maybe worth knowing about before the affair rather than after. Linda went for guilt. Said she couldn't understand how I could do this to someone I claimed to love. I loved someone who told me she was in love with another man via text message. Once she sent that, I was free to share the truth with whoever it affected. A real man would have kept quiet. Linda said this, word for word, to my face. I looked at her for a moment. Your daughter cheated on me with her married boss at his wife's company. You're telling me the right response is for me to say nothing and protect everyone who wronged me? Amber dropped the performance. It wasn't cheating. I told you about it after it had started. That's still cheating. Then she said the thing that actually made me blink before responding. Colin's staying with me now. His wife kicked him out. We need money for a lawyer and we're running low. You owe me half the furniture. Half the furniture. That I bought in the apartment whose lease has only ever had my name on it. She said we'd lived together long enough that it was communal property. I explained, and I kept my voice completely level the entire time, which I'm quietly proud of, that we were never married, that I had receipts for every piece of furniture in that apartment, and that the lease was in my name alone, which ended the conversation on that particular topic. Linda tried one final approach. Said I damaged Colin's relationship with his kids by doing all of this. I said Colin had been building that damage long before I sent a single message, and none of it was mine to own. Around that point, I quietly hit record on my phone. They seemed to sense a shift and started wrapping up faster than they'd planned. On the way out, Amber said, "This isn't over. Colin knows people. So does Dana. More important people, considering she actually owns things." They left. I saved the recording. Next morning, I walked down to my car and found a long, deep scratch running the entire length of the driver's side. Clean, deliberate. I filed a police report. The building's security camera had a gap right at that section of the lot, a blind spot nobody had gotten around to fixing. Nothing came of the report officially. I knew. I just couldn't prove it. Okay, pause. Me again. Linda showed up to the apartment of the man her daughter cheated on and told him, to his face, that a real man would have kept quiet. The correct response, per Amber's mom, is to get a BTW text after 4 years and quietly absorb all of it, so nobody who wronged you faces a single consequence. That's not a man. That's a terms and conditions agreement nobody reads. And then Princess BTW asked for the furniture, while crashing with the guy who just lost his job at his wife's company, while being sued for $200,000. That's not entitlement. That's something they'd have to invent a new name for. Things settled back into my regular pace after that. Work, the apartment, whatever was going on with the supplier dispute I'd been managing for weeks. Nate kept texting, though, and the updates kept getting more interesting. Turns out Colin had been promising Amber a promotion and a significant raise for months. Positions and salary decisions he had absolutely no authority to give. Dana controlled all of that. He was making promises from someone else's checkbook. He'd also been telling Amber he was getting divorced soon for close to a full year before any of this came out. Not considering it, not thinking about it. Actively planning to leave, he'd said. And then the investigation Dana ran, which she apparently ran the way she ran everything, meaning very thoroughly, turned up at least 2 other employees Colin had been involved with at some point during his 5 years there. Different time frames, different people, same basic pattern. One of the previous situations had apparently gotten bad enough that the employee requested a team transfer and filed an informal HR complaint, which went nowhere because Colin sat one review layer above the HR process for a portion of the firm, and the complaint lived in a system he had access to. The other one had left the company entirely. Colin had marked her departure in her file as performance-related. Dana found both during her investigation. Nate said she'd had a forensic accountant and an employment attorney in the building within 48 hours of the Monday firing. She'd been building the case all weekend. So Amber hadn't landed the visionary who finally recognized her potential. She'd landed the firm's longest-running open secret, running the same play on a rotation that started well before she ever got hired. She'd been told she was the one he was finally serious about, that he'd been waiting for the right situation before making a real change. That was almost certainly the same thing he'd said, at some point, in some form, to at least one of the others. I thought about that occasionally. Not often, but occasionally. She texted me around this time. Dana is taking everything. The house, the cars, the whole savings account. She's being completely unreasonable. It's legally hers. He just had access to it. We're going to end up homeless. We can barely cover groceries right now. You both have professional degrees and work experience. Get jobs. Nobody will hire us. Dana is blackballing us across the whole industry. Or nobody wants to bring in 2 people who got fired for an affair that disrupted a firm's leadership. That's a different problem than blackballing. She called me heartless. I reminded her what the first word of the breakup text was. She didn't have a follow-up for that. Then, and I genuinely did not see this coming, they launched a GoFundMe. Not making this up. The title was something like, "Help Us Fight Corporate Retaliation and a Vindictive Ex." They wrote in the description that Dana was abusing her authority as the company's owner to punish 2 people for following their hearts. They set the goal at $50,000. They raised $127. The platform removed it for violating terms of service. I definitely smiled when that notification came through. For several minutes. Timeout. Me again, for the listeners. Here's what Captain Family Values actually built during his 5 years at his wife's firm. Promotions he had no authority to give, a promise to leave his wife that ran nearly a full year without action, and at least 2 prior situations with employees before Amber arrived. All while posting about family values and work-life balance. That's not a career. That's a franchise model with multiple locations. And Amber traded 4 years with someone who showed up for a guy running the same play before she got there. She didn't upgrade. She got a used model with undisclosed mileage and a GoFundMe that raised $127. The deposition is next. It gets significantly worse. Final update. Dana's attorney reached out a few weeks after everything went down. She asked if I'd be willing to provide a deposition about what I knew of Colin and Amber's behavior during the time I knew them personally. I said yes. All of it was true. There was no reason not to. At the deposition, I learned things I hadn't known going in. The room was a standard conference room, not a courtroom, no drama. Dana's 2 attorneys, a court reporter, me. I'd taken a half day from work. It ran about 2 hours total. Most of what I could offer was pretty straightforward. I described the dinner at our apartment, what Colin had said about his role at the firm over the course of that evening, what Amber had told me about him over the months I knew them. The attorneys were calm and methodical. One of them took notes by hand. Nobody made anything feel bigger than it was, which I appreciated. They thanked me at the end and said they'd reach out if they needed a follow-up. The embezzlement details came out not because I said anything relevant to them, but because one of the attorneys referenced the internal audit in passing while we were reviewing the timeline. I think to establish a date. That's when I heard the $15,000 figure for the first time. Colin had been running personal expenses through the company card. Meals, hotel stays, smaller purchases that together added up to around $15,000 over the period Dana's team had reconstructed. Not massive per transaction, but consistent enough that once someone looked for it, it was obvious. Amber had been logging hours she hadn't worked, approved and signed off by Colin. And then the third thing, the one I genuinely hadn't anticipated. They'd been using Hartley Strategy Group's confidential client database. 8 years of Dana's client relationships, proprietary account information, contacts and trust she'd built from scratch, to quietly reach out to those same clients about a competing firm they were setting up on the side. While still on payroll at Dana's company, using her firm's own intelligence to try to take its clients. So this wasn't just a messy termination and a divorce anymore. Dana was pushing for criminal charges, embezzlement, theft of trade secrets, 2 separate categories, different implications. Amber called me in full panic mode that week. Her voice sounded different, less performance, more genuine fear under the surface. You have to help us. Tell the investigators we didn't steal anything. I don't know what you did or didn't take. That's between you and your attorneys. Colin could actually go to jail. Then he shouldn't have stolen from his wife's company. A pause. It was only like $15,000. That's still a felony. The amount doesn't change what category it is. She hung up, blocked me. An hour later, unblocked, and sent a long wall of text explaining that all of this was my fault, that I was petty and vindictive, that I'd triggered a chain of events I couldn't control, that I needed to live with what I'd done to real people. I read the whole thing, blocked her back. Colin tried something different. He showed up at my workplace, made it to the front desk in the lobby before security stopped him. I'd warned them after the voicemail that this might eventually happen, so they were already watching for it. They walked him out while he was saying I'd destroyed his family. By my rough accounting, he'd been quietly working on that project for several years before I sent a single message. The legal stuff is still technically active. From what Nate hears, it's not trending their way. Colin's parents took out a second mortgage on their house to fund his defense. Amber is being represented by Linda, who, as it turns out, is a real estate attorney, not a criminal defense lawyer. They couldn't afford anyone with the right specialty. Amber's LinkedIn still lists her as a consultant at Hartley Strategy Group. Her actual job, as of recently, is at a call center. Colin deleted all his social media after someone, not me, I want to be clear about that, built a website with all the publicly available court documents, organized by date and fully searchable. Whoever that was, genuine respect. Dana's firm is doing better than it was before any of this happened. She promoted people who'd been quietly putting in real work for years and brought in new talent from outside. 3 major clients specifically told her they chose Hartley Strategy Group, partly because of how she handled the situation. Said it demonstrated the kind of leadership they wanted to work with. She sent me a handwritten card, Starbucks gift card, tucked inside. The note said something like, "Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth. My children and I are better off knowing." Actually, I caught myself writing his real name in the story there. I've been swapping it throughout this whole post. Old habit. Anyway. I kept the card. Same apartment, lease still only in my name, same couch I put together myself years ago. Got a promotion at work about 2 months after everything went down. Started seeing someone new not long after that. She communicates like a normal person and has never once in any message started anything with BTW. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel some satisfaction watching all of it unfold, but here's what's actually true. I sent one LinkedIn message. The embezzlement was their decision. The client theft was their decision. The GoFundMe was their decision. Colin showing up at my job was his decision. Every choice they made after I hit send was entirely theirs. They thought the setup was safe because Colin was the boss. Turns out he was just an employee, lying to, stealing from, and slowly taking apart the thing his wife had spent 8 years building. He came to my apartment for dinner, complimented my pasta, talked about a couple's trip that summer, and 6 months later his girlfriend texted me BTW. Some people learn hard lessons the easy way. Others learn them in a deposition room with a criminal attorney across the table and their parents' house as collateral. I sent one screenshot. Everything else was math. Look, some people are going to say he should have just taken the BTW text and moved on quietly. I get that. But here's what I keep coming back to. Dana had 2 kids with this guy. She deserved to know what was happening inside her own marriage and at her own company. He gave her that. One screenshot, nothing more. What she did with it was hers to decide. What Colin and Amber chose after getting caught, the embezzlement, the theft, the GoFundMe, the furniture ask, those were their moves. He just told the truth. Drop a comment. What would you have done? Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.